What is up, ladies and gents? This is George Bean, and today I thought it would be good if I did a review for an intriguing documentary that was released in 2015 about a notorious doomed project in the late 1990s. The documentary I'm talking about is called The Death of Superman Lives: What Happened? This documentary, helmed by the late Jon Schnepp, chronicles the 2-year production limbo that went into developing a new Superman movie titled Superman Lives, before the studio Warner Brothers had ultimately decided to cancel the project altogether. To mention first, Superman Lives was written to be based on the Death of Superman comic book story arc in 1993, and was intended to be a standalone reboot of the Superman film series from the 1970s and 80s, which starred Christopher Reeve as the titular Superman. But get this, this Superman Lives was supposed to be directed by Tim Burton and starring Nicolas Cage as Superman. Yep, that's right. We almost came damn near close to getting a Superman film directed by Tim Burton and starring Nicolas Cage. Can you believe that? Now, I believe I should explain to you all how much I honestly know about Superman and everything about him. To say again, I have never been a comic book fan. I have never read a comic book in my entire life, so I only know the superheroes through their movies. Like to say, I have been a bit of a Batman fan since having first watched Batman and Batman Forever on tape when I was probably like 3 or 4, but it was really, I could probably credit the Dark Knight trilogy as being the very films that had strengthened the inner Bat fan in me. And since then, as you've seen in almost all my videos, I happen to wear a Batman cap. I've been wearing this cap for 10 years since I first bought it along with a Batman t-shirt when The Dark Knight was coming out, and I wore them when I saw that film in the cinema. But over the years, I have begun to grow more into also being a fan of Superman, mainly as interpreted by Chris Reeve. He perfectly encapsulated who the character was like in the comics. Now, to discuss how Superman Lives came into play, we have to travel back in time to 1987, the year of the theatrical release of Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, which was the final film to star Chris Reeve as Superman. The film was a critical and commercial failure, pushing its producing studio Canon Films into bankruptcy, and had effectively put the series on hiatus. A hiatus that would end up lasting 19 years. But despite this, the owners of the Superman series, the studio Warner Brothers, had still wanted to make a 5th Superman film, and thus plans began in the late 1980s with a sequel titled Superman 5, which would have starred Chris Reeve once again, and based on my reading of the script, would have concluded the series on a worthy note, ending with Superman proposing to Lois Lane after revealing his true identity to her. And to also bring up, this script's premise of Superman's death and rebirth had coincidentally predated the Death of Superman comics. The film was to have been produced by Ilya Salkind, who along with his father Alexander Salkind had previously produced all the previous Superman films with the exception of 4, and also produced the 1984 spin-off Supergirl. Then, with the success of the Death of Superman comic, Warner Brothers opted to purchase the Superman film rights from the Salkinds in '93, and hired producer Jon Peters to develop the film. As a side note, Jon Peters was also a producer on the 1989 film Batman, which was directed by Tim Burton. Peters' first step was hiring Jonathan Lemkin to write a new script. And of course, this script was also being written under strict conditions dictated by major toy companies. But but that script did not turn out very well. Warner Brothers did not like it, and so since the uh, since the Superman Reborn script, the alien supercomputer Brainiac was always intended to be the main villain of the ever-evolving project. Now, as a minor side note for anybody who don't know who Brainiac is, picture him as Ultron if he were instead an alien. But upon reviewing the Lemkin script again, the Warner execs didn't like it, as they felt that it was too similar to their then-in-development Batman Forever, and so Peters had hired Gregory Haynes to rewrite the script. Now, Kevin Smith was recruited by Warner around August 1996. He was given Lemkin's Reborn script to review, and he gave his pros and cons to the script, mainly in that it felt too campy. And after so many meetings with the Warner executives and Jon Peters, Smith was hired to retool the script. One of Smith's first changes was to the title, changing it from Superman Reborn to Superman Lives. Now, as a bit of a fair warning, this is where things start to get a bit batshit insane when Kevin Smith began having meetings with Jon Peters, who to put it mildly, was a bit of an egotistical psycho. When Smith was officially signed on to write the script, Jon Peters then gave him 3 conditions for the script. Number 1, Peters didn't want Superman to fly. Number 2, he didn't want to see Superman in his trademark suit, claiming that it was too faggy. And number 3, he wanted Superman to battle a giant spider in the climax, as his own homage to the 1933 film King Kong and such others. So with these 3 conditions, Kevin had went ahead and wrote an 80-page outline for the film, and when reviewing the film with Peters then began suggesting new additions into the script. One suggestion was that Superman would have polar bears as guards for his Fortress of Solitude, and in one scene Brainiac would confront these polar bears. He kills one, and the other runs away, claiming it so they don't piss off the PETA people. And another stupid suggestion is to give Brainiac a robot sidekick, describing him as a gay R2-D2 with attitude. And another was to have a scene involving a space dog, his own Chewbacca, because the original Star Wars trilogy was being re-released at that time, and Peters wanted a space dog in his film, as part of an attempt for toy merchandising. The same type of merchandising that befell on Batman and Robin. But once Tim Burton had signed on as director, he immediately jettisoned the Smith script in favor of hiring his friend Wesley Strick to write the script. So Smith ended up being booted off the project like that. Burton's vision was to depict Superman as an existentialist, that sort of stranger in a strange land type of thing. Instead, having Superman or Clark Kent growing up believing he was a human who was subjected to a scientific experiment, and it wouldn't be until around the first act in Strick's script when Clark finally realized that he is actually an alien from another planet, and this causes him to have an existential crisis. Burton's existential Superman actually fits more in line with a usual theme seen in almost all of Burton's films, which is having a protagonist who doesn't exactly fit in with society and is an outsider. It's a theme you can easily find in most of his movies, like Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, Batman, etc. And another thing, Wesley Strick, when he first read Kevin Smith's script, he said there were things in it that wasn't clicking with him, and that has to be due to the fact that he was not a Superman fan or read comics. So here we have a writer who is hired to scribe a film starring a character of which he was not a particular fan of. When he rewrote the script, he completely removed the plot of Brainiac blocking out the sun with a giant disc-like satellite, feeling it was too similar to a plot by Mr. Burns in an episode of The Simpsons. He also wrote in flashback scenes featuring Clark Kent first discovering his powers as a child, and had also even wrote an opening scene featuring Krypton on the verge of destruction, and Brainiac ousting Jor-El and eventually killing him just as Jor-El launches his son on a spaceship bound for Earth. And as he watches Kal-El's spaceship disappear into space, Brainiac vows to hunt him. Now I should also mention the casting choices for this film, which to me sounds very intriguing to think about it. As for whoever was going to play Superman, it ended up being Nicolas Cage, believe it or not. Yeah, I'm not joking, let that sink in for a moment. Nicolas Cage as the Man of Steel. Wow. But in all honesty, if Nick Cage hadn't gotten the chance to play Superman, I think his career would have gone better than what it has become lately. And also worth noting is that Nick Cage is also a card-carrying Superman fan. He had actually owned a copy of the original Action Comics 1 comic book, and so you can tell that he is a big fan. He even named his own son Kal-El. That's how much of a fan he is of Superman. So we can safely say that Nicolas Cage, based on that little fact from him, I honestly believe he could have pulled it off as Superman. We don't know. That depends on if the movie was actually made. Yeah, it's an odd choice, but given that he is a big Supes fan, I believe he would have done the character justice while also giving his own spin on the character. And I also believe he could have pulled off that notion of Superman being an alien. But I don't know, that is just me. Who knows how he would have turned out if he had actually gotten to play Superman. But I believe if given a great script, he could have given a great performance out of it. And also, I had also heard that Cage had also signed a $20 million pay-or-play contract. So even though the film was never made, he had still walked away with $20 million in his wallet. And he had even performed costume tests trying out the Superman suit. Yes, that's right. There's actual video footage of Nicolas Cage in the Superman suit. And I do have to say, he does look fantastic in the suit. I think he looks great in it. This footage can actually be seen in the documentary itself. It is amazing footage to watch. As for the role of Lois Lane, 3 actresses were considered. The first one was Sandra Bullock, and I honestly could picture her as Lois Lane, and this is when her star status was growing, this just after she had done Demolition Man and Speed. The second choice was Courtney Cox, and again, I could actually picture her as Lois, especially since during around that time she was also playing a similar TV reporter, Gail Weathers, in Scream. So seeing her as Gail in Scream, I actually could see her a little bit of Lois Lane in her. And the third choice, the Julianne Moore, yet somewhat of a good choice. I mean, this was when she was filming The Lost World at around the same time. Now, as we all know, Kevin Spacey would go on to play Lex Luthor in Bryan Singer's Superman Returns in '06. But what should be noted is that Spacey was always Warner's prime choice for Lex Luthor since the mid-90s. So yeah, Spacey was considered for Lex in Superman Lives, even 10 years before he would eventually be cast. And as for the main villain, the alien supercomputer Brainiac, Tim Burton's top choice was Christopher Walken, as they both had worked together on Batman Returns a few years prior. And you know what? I actually think that's a cool casting choice. Chris Walken as Brainiac? Sounds perfect. I could picture him as Brainiac, oozing with a sense of menace and strangeness. Now, in the end of all this, it is April 1998, and Superman Lives seemed to be closer than ever to actually being filmed. So much so that according to the crew, they were apparently, literally, 3 weeks away from shooting. That's just how close this film was to actually being made. But suddenly, the crew were then suddenly given the heart-crushing news. Warner Brothers had just decided to pull the plug on the project, that they were shutting it down, canceling it. Everyone involved was crushed by the news. Tim Burton became depressed by the news, and after a while, he decided to jump ship off the project and instead move on to his next project, which would become the 1999 gothic horror film Sleepy Hollow. Now, it isn't exactly straightforward as to why Superman Lives had been cancelled, but there are a number of suggested factors behind the project's cancellation, and I could name 3 prime factors behind its cancellation. Number 1 is conflicting visions between many different writers, producers, and studio executives. The fact that nobody had one straightforward idea of what the movie should be. One suggested that Superman should get into kung fu fights. I'm not joking. They actually thought of having Superman doing kung fu fights with a gang of ninja criminals. I mean, that sounds so stupid. I mean, everybody, even Tim Burton himself, thought that idea had sounded stupid. Yeah, you know how you fucked up when even Tim Burton thinks your idea is stupid. With conflicting visions, that would lead us to number 2 being the changing scripts. I mean, not just 1, not 2, but 3 script drafts. Yes, this movie had went through 3 different writers, Kevin Smith, Wesley Strict, and finally Dan Gilroy, who is the brother of Tony Gilroy, writer of the Bourne trilogy. As a result, this scenario, 3 different scripts coming in, would lead to number 3 being a ballooning budget, as Strict's script was estimated to cost up to $200 million to make, another $100 million if you count the marketing costs. And so Strict was fired, and Dan Gilroy was brought in to retool the entire script to lower the budget down to at least $100 million. This meant having to cut things out of the script, like for example, 14 buildings don't come down, we're gonna keep it inside the 5th floor of this one building, and the Fortress of Solitude scenes gets jettisoned. Everything goes into Superman's tomb, things like that. At that time, Warner Brothers was experiencing a series of flops, their biggest one being Batman and Robin. And so what it seemed like excitement in pumping like up to $200 million on a superhero project that deviates from its source started to look more like an even riskier endeavor. And so they had ultimately decided to cancel it and funnel the fundings from that film into the Will Smith film, The Wild Wild West, which ironically was produced by Jon Peters and also featured a giant mechanical spider in the climax. Of course, as history shows, we all know how that film turned out financially. But still, this documentary, The Death of Superman Lives, is very entertaining to watch, especially when you watch the interviews from the people involved, such as Tim Burton, Wesley Strict, costume designer Colleen Atwood, production designer Rick Heinrichs. They all give very intriguing insight into the production process behind this cancelled project. And they all talk about it with an amount of passion and enthusiasm to it. I think the best moments probably has to be from Tim Burton. Most of the time he looks like he's out on another planet or something. But I also think the best stuff comes from the crew's experiences working with Jon Peters. This dude sounds like he was insane. For the art department, every time he'd come in, they would be like, oh god, here he comes. And even apparently, Peters would give a demonstration in front of the crew where he wrestled Rick Heinrichs to the ground to show off some jujitsu moves. This dude is nuts. But interestingly, the only person absent in this documentary is Nicolas Cage himself. I guess he was unavailable at the time, but I would have liked to know what he would have liked to have said about the project, his side of the story. In addition to first-hand accounts by the crew involved in the project, the documentary also shows us multitudes of concept art drawings and storyboards of what kind of a film they were going to produce. Of course, these drawings were made as like a leap-off point, but it at the very least gives you a visual idea of what the movie possibly would have looked like had it actually been made. And based specifically on these drawings, this movie would have been a very visually pleasing film to watch. There's arts of what Krypton possibly would have looked like, the various looking Superman suits, the alien monsters, anything. They all look so good for a science fiction film. You've got to watch this documentary just for these concept arts and drawings. They look amazing on their own. It's a shame that they gone to waste after the project was cancelled. But also, Superman Lives has been looked to as an example of what happens if you deviate too far from the original source material, and now has been viewed more so thanks to the 2013 reboot, Man of Steel, which some have compared to Lives, and I noticed some similarities myself. Now, if this film had been made and released, what would its reception have been? To be honest, we don't really know. It is just pure speculation as to how people, critics, and audience, comic book fans, would have reacted to this film. But I could give two theories as to what its reception probably would have been. One being for certain is that it would not have been 100% positive. Its receptions probably would have been more in the mixed parts, possibly bordering on negative. It possibly would have gotten the same receptions as either Man of Steel or Superman Returns. It probably would have left a little dent on the Superman series. And two being that it would have been the second theory would have been very negative. Using Batman and Robin as a prime example, that film was made to deviate from the series' dark tone and move more towards the kid-friendly tone and to make it to merchandise toys tied to it. The reaction to that film was negative, and it did not make as much money as Warner's had hoped, and it had effectively put the Batman series on hiatus for 8 years until it was rebooted in 2005 with Batman Begins. And now, for myself to bring up, I've gotten to read the 3 scripts by Smith, Strick, and Gilroy, and to be honest, in all my formal opinion, out of the 3 scripts, I'd honestly say that Kevin Smith's script is actually the best out of the bunch, because it is obviously written by a huge fan of the character and mythos, and is shown to be the most faithful to the character, while Strick and Gilroy's scripts were written to fit more in Burton's style and vision, a somewhat gothic expressionistic Tim Burton film. Kind of like what happened with Batman Returns. In fact, if I could say it, I'd say Strick and Gilroy's scripts can be compared to Batman Returns, too. Because it has all the strangeness, and it focuses on the villains. And I think that's what possibly would have happened with this Superman film. It probably would have been like another Batman Returns or another Batman and Robin for Warner. I don't know. There are even some elements in their script that didn't make sense. Like, for example, they had created a child character who was to be Lois Sneeze, who I swear to God was never given a name in the script. And this kid was annoying. They could have just jettisoned that kid out of the script and it wouldn't have changed a thing in the overall story. However, now this is just my little opinion and wishful thinking, but if there ever is to be a chance, I would love to see Kevin Smith's original Superman Lives script actually be adapted to film. maybe as an animated film. So far, there have been a long string of DC animated films, one most prominent being the two-parter The Dark Knight Returns. So, in a way, if Kevin Smith's script were ever to be adapted into an animated film, I picture it being similarly done like The Dark Knight Returns. Make it a two-parter comprised of 2 hour and a half, two 1 hour and a half films, and also use the original concept arts and storyboards as the basis for the animation in the film. So, but either way, if you are a Superman fan or is interested in filmmaking, then I would definitely recommend The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened, and I would even give it a rating of 7 stars out of 10, as it is an interesting documentary about the canned Superman Lives project. Or, like, if you had ever heard about this film when it was being made and cancelled, like, read about it in newspaper outings, and you want to know more about it, then this documentary gives the proper insight you'd want to learn about this canned film. You will not be disappointed by it. I loved watching this documentary. I even now tend to watch it multiple times, just to watch it over and over. So, yeah, I'd recommend this documentary. You can find it on Jon Schnepp's website for purchase, order and purchase. So, go to his website and purchase a copy of the documentary. So, thanks for watching, ladies and gents, and until then, I will see you all next time. Peace!